I was raised in a household that spoke victim. And so that became my default language. That was the language I brought into the world. And so whether it was relationship with myself, relationship with others, or relationship with situations, the lens that I had was always that of a victim, of a prisoner. And of course, Ranjan, that wasn't fraudulent. That was me, right? That was how I coped. And so 4 times in one day, I was eating this stuff. And that was the moment that I realized this multi-billion-dollar bank has essentially told me, we are taking away access to your money because of the choices that you are making in your life. Yeah, it's beautiful. I appreciate you sharing that, and I felt what you were saying as you were saying it. Feels very, very true for me as well. And there's an interesting thing about decision making is I was just talking to a friend of mine about this the other day, and he was saying he was looking to get clarity on his relationship, like whether or not he should stay in this relationship. And he was, of course, looking at all the content of the relationship, right? Oh, is this person the right person? Would she be a good enough mom? Am I attracted enough to her? Do I think she's ambitious enough? All the content of stuff that we typically look at. And there's nothing wrong with that. Content can be helpful. So he kept saying he wanted clarity. And I asked him if he could see the difference between what he is looking at as clarity and the state of being clear. Hello, Ranjan.
Hey, Jason, how are you?
I'm great, man. How are you? Good to see you.
After a long time, I've been waiting for this conversation.
Me too, man. I'm very excited to connect.
Hi, Jason. Thank you so much for joining us today on this show, Moments with Masters. And I really have been looking forward for this fun conversation with you. And before we dive into the conversation, let me introduce you to my Indian audience. Our guest, our master of the day, is a global keynote speaker on future-proof leadership and is a mental performance and leadership coach for celebrities, change makers, and CEOs. He is also the host of the Jason Goldberg is Ruining Podcasting podcast, author of the #1 international bestseller on self-leadership entitled Prison Break, and creator of the Playful prosperity and competition-proof business immersion programs. He has been a featured expert on media outlets including ABC, CBS, and Fox, as well as teaching on the MindValley and SoulPancake platforms, and has founded multiple startups, including one in partnership with NASA and the space shuttle program. He now focuses on blending his signature mix of simple and transformational wisdom, captivating storytelling, practical business mentorship, and belly-busting humor to make personal growth less personal growthy, and to leave everyone he meets with at least 5% of more joy than when he found them. As a sought-after international speaker and host, JG, I revealed something about his name, has shared the stage with some of the world's best thought leaders and innovators in human potential and performance, including Jason Silva, host of Nat Geo's Brain Games, Dr. Stephenson, the 3-foot giant, Don Miguel Ruiz, the 4 Agreements, and Vishen Lakhiani, CEO of MindValley, Stephen Kotler, the author of Stealing Fire, and Marisa Peer, the UK psychotherapist to the stars, and so many others. I am honored to have you on my show, Jason. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation and for being with us.
Well, thank you for having me. And now that the whole bio has been read, that's the hour. So I guess it's nice to see you. That was finished.
Jason, actually, I know I am a master at digging for the deeper stories, and I'm going to do that with you as well. And there's something interesting, you dedicated your book Prison Break to Steve Chandler, and he played a key role in your transformation. So I see that, Steve Chandler is to you who Steve Harrison is to me, and I would love to learn about the first thing, like what happened and what was your prison story, and how did Steve Chandler help you break out of this prison, which of the circumstances, and help you become the self leader And what was this transition about? Take us into that fun trip, I would love to say.
It's fun. It's fun now looking back. It didn't seem fun when it was starting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. My
Yeah.
my own prisoner story, I mean, really, I think it's where a lot of people's prisoner stories come from. It's very innocent, it's very well-meaning. It comes from their upbringing. It comes from, where they were raised. And if you are raised in a house that speaks French, you're not stupid because you don't speak Spanish. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you because you don't speak Spanish. You were just raised in a household that spoke French. And so I was raised in a household that spoke victim. And so that became my default language. That was the language I brought into the world. And so whether it was relationship with myself, relationship with others, or relationship with situations, the lens that I had was always that of a victim, of a prisoner. And so that was just, and I don't blame my mother for that. She learned it from her mother, and it's generational, right? And so that became my default. So I didn't know there was anything wrong with that, because again, if you're raised with one language, you don't think there's anything wrong with the language you speak. It's the language you speak. The way that manifested for me, though, being in that kind of victim mentality so much, was that I had a lot of internal struggle. That what was going on between the ears was just constantly feeling like it was beating me up and beating me down. And so I had, from a very young age, like, teenage years, I had lots of depression and anxiety and just always stressed out. I had suicidal ideation into my mid-20s, almost late 20s. And I just always kind of felt like, even though I was successful, whatever that means, depending on your definition, I was professionally successful. My career was going well, and I had gotten into, to technology really early and became a tech consultant and was making a bunch of money and had the house and the car and all the things. And yet I still on the inside was just constantly feeling empty. And the way I would fill that feeling of emptiness was with food. And so food became my go-to coping mechanism. Instead of what I would do now, inquiry, instead of sitting with what I'm feeling, instead of really challenging the thoughts that are running my life or creating my perspective, I didn't have the tools or the understanding back then for that. And so it was food. And so I would eat when I was happy. I would eat when I was sad. I would eat when I was stressed. I would just eat no matter what. And so that, of course, manifested itself into a body that was, chubby as a young kid, overweight as a teenager, and morbidly obese as an adult. And so by the time I was in my late 20s, which is when I'm the director of operations for a tech consulting firm, I'm making the most money I've ever made in my life, have all the external things. And I'm also 332 pounds, and I'm on antidepressants, and I'm having suicidal thoughts as I'm driving to work in the morning, like all these things that are just running my life. And I knew it didn't feel good, but I didn't know there was any other option that was available to me. I had done some therapy and stuff before, but nothing really ever felt like it was doing anything. And then I had this moment in 2009, and I was in my late 20s, and I was in this engineering job, this operations manager, and I tried to make a purchase on Amazon, and it was like a $60 purchase, and it was on my bank card, so I knew there was money in the bank to cover that. And I went to go make the purchase, and my card got declined. And I was such an angry person back then. And there's nothing, I don't think there's anything wrong with anger, but not only was I an angry person, I didn't know how to channel that anger. It just became, outbursts, just like rage, just boiling over at anything that didn't go to my preferences, that didn't go my way. And so I got really, really angry, and I call the bank, and I'm like, yelling at the guy on the phone. Why isn't my card working? I don't understand this. What's wrong with you guys? And the guy on the phone from the bank essentially tells me that the bank suspected that there was some potential fraud on the account. And so they disconnected the card to make sure that, to protect my assets, to protect my money. And so most people then would be really happy, like, thank you so much. I appreciate that you're looking out for me and making sure that my money is safe. I didn't. I was a rageaholic. I got even more mad. What do you mean? Somebody tried to hack my account. Did somebody steal my identity? I'm just getting more and more angry because I had no control over anything that was going on inside. And so I demanded to know, what were these charges, these fraudulent charges? And the man on the phone, his name was Stephen, funny enough. We got Steve Hardison, Steve Chandler, and I got Stephen on the phone here. And he tells me that the fraudulent charges were that there were 4 fast food transactions in one day, that somebody had made a purchase at 4 different fast food restaurants in one day. And their system flagged that as being potentially fraudulent. right? Because who would eat at a fast food place 4 times in one day? This must be somebody has stolen the card and they're testing it by making small purchases before going to make a big purchase. And of course, Ranjan, that wasn't fraudulent. That was me, right? That was how I coped. And so 4 times in one day, I was eating this stuff. And that was the moment that I realized this multi-billion-dollar bank has essentially told me, we are taking away access to your money because of the choices that you are making in your life. So this is the day that I say the universe cut me off. This was the day where I finally couldn't find somebody else to blame for the situation I was in. And so this wasn't like a freeing, liberating feeling. This was there was a lot of shame in this. Why am I doing this to myself? Why am I always so stressed? And why am I always so depressed? And how did I let myself get this big 330 pounds? And it was very shame-based. And then at some point, the shame subsided a few hours later. And I started thinking to myself, well, listen, I'm a pretty smart guy, right? I have at least average intelligence. And there are people that I've met in the world that have been through way worse than I have been through. And not to compare traumas, right? You can drown in 8 feet of water, but you can also drown in 8 inches of water. So it's not to compare who's had it worse, but objectively, people that I had seen who had been through worse things than me, and they didn't seem to see life the way I saw it. They still seemed to have optimism. They still seemed to be able to have joy and peace, and they seemed to be able to move forward and have good relationships with themselves and others. So what did they know that I didn't know? And so I started trying to reverse engineer that, right? Which is what we did in technology all the time. We would reverse engineer things to figure out how they worked, and then we could build new things. And so that's when I started to dive into personal growth. And actually, the first coach that I found was a guy, and I'm not sure if you know him, but he also coached with Steve, is a guy called Jacob Sokol. I don't know if you know Jacob. Incredible coach, just amazing, amazing guy. And so I coached with him first, and he's the one who introduced me to Steve Chandler, to his work in general. And so I read Reinventing Yourself. And it was like I learned a new language. It's like somebody came out and said, hey, you've been speaking French your whole life. Why don't you try Spanish? And I'm reading this book just going like every page, it was like, that's me. That's me too. Yep, that's me. And then noticing that there is a different way to see the world. And so I remember finishing up with Jacob, and I wanted to move on and get another coach and continue the journey. And I knew in my head, I wouldn't be able to afford Steve Chandler. Steve's, to me, the greatest coach of all time. So I reach out to him and I say, hey, I just finished coaching with Jacob. I know you know him. I'd love to have a new coach. I probably can't afford you, but if you have any people that you've worked with that you feel are really good coaches, I'd love to connect with them. And Steve, in total Steve fashion, said, why don't we just get on the phone and have a chat? And I said, okay, great. So he calls me, and I didn't realize he was going to call me, and I'm at a gun range. Now, I don't shoot guns. I don't like guns at all, but I happen to be in this startup incubator for one of my companies, and there was another company there that had this like machine gun attachment thing, and they took us all to the gun range. I'm staying back. All of a sudden, Steve calls me, so I have to run and get in the car, and there are literally gunshots going off in the background as I'm talking to Steve. Steve probably thinks I'm in a war zone. And so we're on the phone talking, and through our conversation, I decided to join his ACS program, right? Back then it was called something else, but now it's called ACS. And that was how I started working with him, and then eventually started working with him one-on-one, and worked with him for, the better part of a decade one-on-one. And you said in the beginning that Steve has made an impact in my life. He continues to make an impact on my life every day that I forget and then remember the truth of the nature of the experience of life.
That was very powerful. This reminds me, Jason, when I was growing up and as a child, I remember my father would come back. He was a blue-collared employee in an organization, and he would come back every day from his work, and he would say, my boss is this, my boss is that. I didn't have a good day. I didn't have this day. And I don't blame my dad, he didn't know it, but he wasn't aware of what he's speaking. But then the only thing that I would always listen and, be spoken about is being a victim of the circumstances. And unconsciously it permeates into every part of your life, so much so that at some point you do not even realize that there is a you inside which has some say in anything that has to happen on the outside. And it went on for years, and I was about 18 or 19 when something happened with me, and the whole life shifted. And I then read a book called The Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahamsa Yogananda, and I recently came to know again from Steve Chandler that that is the book that changed his life too. And I that is the book that showed me. And then in about 1997, I left my family. I renounced my family to become a monk in Swami Vivekananda's mission. But then when I went there, and I was spiritually given this initiation by my guru, who was the then vice president of the Sri Ramakrishna mission, and he said, he gave me a mantra, and then he told me something, and he said, like, the secret of living your life is be like a boat on the surface of the water, but let not the water be in you. And when I went back, I was there, something was not right, and I something else happened in my family, and I had to come back to my family back again after a few months. But then I realized that if a monk is saying, if my guru is saying that you can be in the water, but let not the water be in you, that means there is a choice. There is a choice of how you live in, how you create your life. And most of the times we do not come back to the point where we realize, where we operate from this choice, and we behave as if we don't have a choice. And then the moment, even if you realize, then we get so entangled in the process that we forget that it's about the decision, and it's about the decision. And decision is not a one-time thing. It has to happen every day, and in fact, multiple times, even in a single day, on a single day. And it's not that you decided and you became Jason. It's not that I decided and I became Ranjan. It's a long journey. But then we are so obsessed about the how, than realizing that there is something that happens before that. And that is the point when you decide that I am going to be the leader of my life. I am going to become a conscious creator of my life. I would love to listen about your perspective on decision making, being decisive about what kind of a life you want to live, and who do you want to be in your life.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I appreciate you sharing that, and I felt what you were saying as you were saying it. Feels very, very true for me as well. And there's an interesting thing about decision making is I was just talking to a friend of mine about this the other day, and he was saying he was looking to get clarity on his relationship, like whether or not he should stay in this relationship. And he was, of course, looking at all the content of the relationship, right? Oh, is this person the right person? Would she be a good enough mom? Am I attracted enough to her? Do I think she's ambitious enough? All the content of stuff that we typically look at. And there's nothing wrong with that. Content can be helpful. So he kept saying he wanted clarity. And I asked him if he could see the difference between what he is looking at as clarity and the state of being clear, right? There's a difference between those things. Because when I say I'm looking for clarity, what I'm saying is I'm looking for certainty on the path that I'm taking. But if I'm bringing along with me fear and anxiety and scarcity and all of these things along, I'm unclear while trying to get clarity, right? That's like putting, Mexican ingredients into a dish and then hoping that it tastes French on the other side. They don't match, right? And so we started talking about, well, what does it look like to be in a state of being clear? So the state of being clear says, I remove all of the self-imposed beliefs and stories and obstacles that I'm creating in this moment. And I get to a place of clarity first before I go try to make a decision. And I think that's been the biggest thing for me is anytime I'm fearful about making a decision, it means that I am not being clear before trying to get clarity. Does that make sense? Oh, I've lost your audio, Ranjan. Oh, I think
yeah,
there you
sorry.
go.
Yeah, there's something interesting, Jason, that I've read your book, Prison Break, and there are several things. since we're talking about thinking and the state of mind, I had a time in my life when I was worried down, and I was not in the right state of mind, but then I continued my practice of coming back to that what do you call it, a state of mind from where you can consciously create yourself. And I would do my best to be there, and at the same time, yeah, circumstances did have an impact. And I was working somewhere, and I didn't have much to do, and I was just working there as a receptionist and years ago. And I decided, what do I want to do with this time that I have? And I started reading books. I had a lot of books, and so I started reading books. And then I came across this book called Tough Times Never Last, but Tough People Do. And I read this book, and I decided to try, to explore the possibility thinking. And I did that. And since the reason I'm asking you this question is because I came across this word possibility thinking, in your book as well. And then I that was the first time I explored how you can materialize, how you can treat something like an idea, and you can just manifest it, materialize it, through the process of this thinking and doing. And I just was curious. I just wanted to be curious about, whether it's true, and what can I do to experiment and see whether the possibility. And I wanted to be an author. And then I wrote a book, and I became an author in less than 12 months. And this was a book in my mother tongue, and in a South Indian language, Telugu. And but the purpose of this book was not the book. The purpose was to see whether ideas can really turn real. And I just wanted to become an author. I just wanted to see the possibility. I just tried it. But then after the book got published, I realized that I never wanted to actually be an expert on this subject. and you won't believe I wrote this book I got this book published in 2003, and this is exactly 20 years from now. And you won't believe, even I didn't believe, like just last week, I even posted this on my social media. Just last week, somebody who had read this book 20 years ago and who was my client for this subject, he invited me back again, and he got some value from my suggestions, and he paid me for the value that I created 20 years ago. And I loved it. And then I went ahead, I kept on doing, and I then found that I wanted to be someone who explores and experiments this the inside out living, and how every one of us is born with that seed, and how I can help others also see that same thing. And I decided to write another book, which is Hit Your Restart Button, How to Reinvent Yourself and Start Living a Zero Limits Life. And it became an Amazon bestseller in less than 15 days. But then there are times, even if we speak from a right state of mind, there are times you're not in a right state of mind. Life happens. And then there are difficult circumstances, and then you are questioning. You have these questions, you doubt yourself, you doubt your possibility thinking, you doubt everything, even your state of mind. So how did you handle those moments when your possibility thinking was under question, and maybe you had self-doubt in you? And what did you do, and what do you still do?
Yeah. I was gonna say, it's not gone by any stretch of the imagination. It's interesting because I'm not a purist when it comes to navigating life, personal growth, whatever you want to call it. I'm not a purist in that I think that it's always about the being, or that it's always about the doing, or it's always about questioning your identity, or it's always about sitting with the pain. Like I'm a proponent of doing what works for you in the moment. Right. And having all kinds of different options, and whatever helps you navigate life best, that's fine. And some people will say no, but there is a fundamental truth about the way the mind works and the way the world works. that's fantastic. And sometimes that's not accessible to us when we're in a really low place. And so
Yes.
I don't want to start feeling shame because I'm not able to see that I'm living in the feeling of my thinking when I'm really, really low, right? I want to do whatever is going to work for me. So the reason I say that is because sometimes when I'm in that place where the possibilities-based thinking disappears, I don't do anything. There's
Mm.
nothing to be done. I need to just sit in the same way that a shaken up snow globe, you don't run around the inside of the snow globe trying to grab every piece of snow and put it on the ground, because if you did, you'd be running around the snow globe and you'd be kicking up more snow. And so you'd never actually get the snow to settle. Instead, if a snow globe is shaken up, you put it down and the snow settles all by itself. There's nothing for you to do. So sometimes that's my answer, is to do nothing. Sometimes, though, I realize that the source of my lack of connection to my possibilities-based thinking is because I have mistakenly taken on an identity that is not me. Okay. And so if I've taken on an identity that is not me and I confuse myself to be that identity, then if that identity is the one struggling with not having possibility-based thinking, I think I'm the one struggling with not understanding or not having access to possibilities-based thinking. So what I have to do in that moment is I have to really start questioning this identity that I've confused myself to be. And I've gotten so much value out of it. Another teacher that Steve Chandler turned me on to, Rupert Spira. I don't know if you know Rupert Spira at all, non-dual teacher. Yeah. And so he's been such a wonderful teacher in that. And I have a metaphor that I've created. I created it for a client and now I use it for myself. And I actually have a bracelet to remind me of it. I'll tell you what the bracelet says in a second. But he had a metaphor that I kind of was inspired by and created my own. And it's essentially this. It's, imagine that you are the director of the movie Batman. Have you ever seen the Batman movies before? You've seen those? Yeah. So imagine you're the director of one of the movies, and Michael Keaton is your star of your movie. He's playing Batman. And you're on set and you're directing a scene and Batman's doing his thing and he's karate chopping and shooting people or doing whatever Batman does. And then you yell cut into the scene and you start talking to other people that you work with on the set, getting ready for the next scene. And you look over and you see Batman is pacing back and forth on the set. He looks really, really stressed out. Something's wrong. And he's your star, you're the director. You want to make sure he's okay. So you walk over to him, you go, "Hey, what's going on?" And he goes, I don't know, Ranjan, what if I'm not powerful enough to beat the Joker? What if my technology is not strong enough? And what if the people of Gotham die and it's all my fault? How am I going to live with the blood on my hands of all these innocent people? And you are thinking in your head, what is he talking about? It's a movie. Like what's he getting so stressed out about? But you want to be helpful. You want to be kind. You want to, he's your star again. So you have two choices. Number one, you can say, "Okay, Batman, let's figure out how to make your technology strong enough so you can beat the Joker and save the people of Gotham City." That's option number one. Keeps him in the illusion. Number two, you can remind him that he's Michael Keaton playing the role of Batman. And as soon as he really gets that he's Michael Keaton playing the role of Batman, it doesn't mean that Batman's problems don't exist, right? In Batman's world, those problems are the most pressing problems in the world. And if I want to help Batman with those problems, which version of me is going to be better suited to help him? The one that thinks I am him and then all those problems are mine? Or the one that has a little bit of distance to be able to say, well, that's not who I am. And from this vantage point, I can see possibilities that Batman can't see. And so I wear this bracelet. Literally, it says "not Batman" to remind myself that I'm not Batman. I'm Jason playing the role of Batman. And so anytime I get into this really stressed out place or my possibility-based thinking goes away, I'll sit, I'll close my eyes, and either in my head or out loud, I'll say, "Today I am playing the role," just like Batman, "today I am playing the role of Jason, the stressed out entrepreneur that's mad that this project is not getting off the ground as fast as he wants it to be." Right? That's the character. Like I have a script, I dress a certain way, I act a certain way. I can play that role all day and I can get an Oscar award for it. So that's the role that I'm playing right now. And then I ask myself, how does it feel right here, right now, without an attachment to that role? Not saying the role has gone away. The role exists. We know the role exists. But if they yelled cut on the set and we were done filming for the day, who am I after we're done filming for the day? And I sit here and I say, how does it feel after we are done filming for the day? How does it feel now that I've taken off that costume and they've yelled cut and I'm no longer in that role? And I sit with that. And I feel some sense of peace. I feel some sense of like groundedness, and my mind chatter slows down, and I stop feeling such a lack of possibilities. And from that place, I can then turn to the role of Jason, the stressed out entrepreneur, and say, how can I help? And so that's the whole thing. Like the identity thing, for better or for worse, will either show us all the possibilities or none of the possibilities.
Fantastic. This reminds me of Donald Miller, 1,000 miles, a million miles in 1,000 years, his experience. Have you read this book?
No.
Yeah. Donald Miller wrote a book called Blue Like Jazz, and it was a bestseller. And he was from UK, I believe. And uh, this book was a bestseller. It was his autobiography, Blue Like Jazz. And he was excited about the success of the book, and then it went on for about a year, and he started enjoying his life and forgot about it. And then two filmmakers from US found this book interesting, and they called him and they said, we want to film your book and create a film out of it, and would you we just wanted to talk about the permissions and everything. And he was excited again, and he flew to gave the permission, and he flew to US to stay with them for about 3 to 4 weeks to create the script of the movie. And these, I think there were two filmmakers, and they enjoyed for about a week, and they sat on the table with the papers and their pens and ready to start creating the script. And Donald Miller, the actual person whose story this was, he was just sitting there, and these people were least bothered about him, and they were talking with between themselves as if, where shall we start the story? And they and this guy Donald was like, which story are you talking about? I'm here. Why don't you ask me? This is my story. And these filmmakers were not bothered about him, and they were like, don't disturb us, and we are busy thinking about the story. And he was like, well, I've written a book, and it's my book, and it's my story, and I've written everything in the book. Why don't you look in the book and see where the story starts? But they were like, no, we don't need the book here right now. We want a story. And he couldn't resist asking, and he like, after about a few minutes, he said, why don't you ask me? Why don't you talk to me? This is my story. And he said, well, this is your story, but if this is the way we film it, it's going to be a flop. It's not going to success. So we are creating a successful movie out of your book, and this is something different. And then it's about the next day he understood that, okay, they are recreating something which can be created in a way which will be a successful movie again. And then he sat with them, and he distanced himself from the book, and he started treating the new thing as a story. And then he started giving ideas about his own story. And he wrote that it's about a week later he understood that if I can do this now, I could have done this much earlier, and I could have created the story the way I wanted to live. Yeah. And that is when he woke up to the power of his own choice in creating the story. And he wrote this book called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. And the power of a story, and you being the creator of the story. And Jason, in the last 25 years, as you said, like, you have different people who impacted your life. You have different people who coached you, there have been different leaders in our life who inspire us. And we at some point we want to emulate them in their thinking, and we take them as an inspiration. And I've had different spiritual masters. I have had different new age gurus. I have had different masters for different subjects. And most recently, I've had Steve Harrison, who entered my life, and I learned a lot from this. Oh my God! Like, if Steve Harrison and Steve Chandler, if you have interaction with both, imagine how explosive it is. And traveling with Steve Harrison for more than a year and learning every day from him. My question to you is how important it is to have a point of reference in life. Well, for me, they have really been helpful. And what has been the impact of this having some reference point in your life, whether it's be a trainer or a coach or a book or an expert who helps you see the other side of the story?
Yeah, it's huge. And one of the things I've always told people when they say, what are some of the reasons you love working with Steve Chandler? And there's tons of different reasons. But if I really boil it down, it's that he's really great at pointing me back to one simple fundamental truth. Right. Now, the way you get to that truth is what I said before. I'm not a purist, so you can get to it whatever way you want. But he always points me back to kind of this one fundamental truth of my, my ability to create what I want to create, to not be in this victim consciousness. And so, whether it's Steve or it's a book, like I said, Rupert Spira has been big for me, and Byron Katie's been massive for me. Byron Katie and Steve Chandler are probably the two people that have had the biggest impact in my life. And for me, I am very much, I have an entire folder in my email, and the folder in my email is very non-creatively called emails to myself. It's a very, very creative name. And in that folder are emails that I send to myself that are insights or distinctions or metaphors or whatever, not so that I can go teach them to other people, but because they resonated with me to a point that I know when I need that reminder again, that's going to be it. And as much as I love books, and I do go back to books and I look at highlights and all that stuff, what better wisdom to look at when I need a reminder than the wisdom that came through me as a result of taking in whatever I took in. But however it came out from me, it's my words, it's my thought. So that's the best place to turn, is back home, right? If I'm trying to come back home, I shouldn't go to the store. I should come back home, right? And so that's been huge for me, is having that folder. And I could literally scroll to any random email and click it and be like, oh, wow, yeah, I needed to hear that. Because I really believe that life is a series of remembering and forgetting, remembering and forgetting, remembering and forgetting. Like you said earlier, you don't become, an owner and then you're an owner for life. It doesn't just happen in one moment and then you're done. So if we can agree that it's, or at least if I can believe and buy into that remembering and forgetting is the thing, then when I forget, it's okay, because that's supposed to happen. And then I have the resources to reach out to remember again. And then I'm going to forget again. And then I'll go back to the resource and remember again. So yes, all the things you said, mentors, trainers, coaches, books, insights, whatever they are, they're all ways to help me remember again when I forgot.
And it's not necessary that you feel ashamed of what happened and you start feeling guilty about what happened. And in fact, what I say is that life gives you opportunities disguised as these challenges, and even a few moments of, when you miss that path, it is an opportunity to come back again. And I have felt that every time you come back, you're not the same person. You're a different person. You're far more evolved. And I think, one of the insights that I had was that, the moment you look outward, it's like life is like different tunnels, and you have multiple tunnels around you. And even a moment when you're not aware, you get absorbed into a tunnel, you get sucked into a tunnel. And then from that tunnel you focus on something else, and you're sucked into some other tunnel, and it goes on. But there is something like, a space where you can come back to, and you can make a conscious choice of which tunnel would I love to go into.
Yeah.
And this practice for me, I love at least 60 minutes of solitude, silence, call it meditation, or just sitting in nature, or just by myself, and alone, and giving myself that space, not trying to do something, but just to observe and what's happening, and to come back to that space which you call home. Like come back to that space from where I can decide what I want to do, and then take the action. So what has been your way of coming back home? Like, are there any rituals? Are there any practice that you come back to always?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm one of those people, and I know it's probably become very cliche now in our time, but my morning routine is very sacred to me. And it's one of these things where it's not that when I do the routine, I notice that things are just exponentially better, but I notice that when I don't do the routine, things are exponentially not as good. Right. And so
Yes.
it's like that becomes my baseline. And I was just traveling. I was just in Europe for a month, and it was a lovely trip, but because of the constant movement and the time difference and all the different things, my routine kind of went out the window. And I noticed that my quality of thinking and my state of mind went along with it. And so it was a beautiful reminder for me. Like I was, people said, you're gone for a month. Oh, did you want to stay longer? And I said, no, I was ready to get home. And they said, did you not like Europe? I said, no, I just didn't like not having my routine. And so and of course I can have my routine there, but I hadn't done it. I hadn't chosen to make that a priority. So it was a great reminder for me. So for me, I wake up at 5:30 in the morning, almost every day, even on the weekends. I typically do it, but definitely during the week, I'm up at 5:30, and it's a very quiet time for me. I don't turn on my phone. Phone stays on airplane mode for at least the first hour of the day. And that's time for me where I will meditate and just contemplate and relax. And then I go from that into some visioning, and really, I'm very much my motivation in this phase of my life is to be the man who has a vision for his future and for his family, and then does whatever that man would do every day to prove to himself and anybody else who may see that that is his priority. And so I vision around that as well. And the visions can be anything. Sometimes it could be my future children and me driving them to school. It could be my future wife and us going on a trip. It could be anything random, but it's just to be pulled towards that. So I create some time. There's meditation time for either just silence or for gratitude, speaking to source, whatever that is, and then some visioning to look forward. And then from there, I go to the gym, and I really want to move my body. So I do the soul gym when I first wake up, and then I do the body gym after that. And those two things together, to me, are what keep me as focused and as possibility based and as on top of my experience of life as I possibly can be.
Jason, I would love to learn about, your transition from the corporate world to coaching. You told that, but why coaching? And you getting coached is a different thing, and you being a coach is a different thing. So what inspired you to be a coach and to help others, find that connection and to the source of themselves being the creator of their lives? What inspired you, and why did you choose to become a coach?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's really going back to the essence of who I've always been. And when I look back to being a child and always being commended or praised for my kindness or for my gentleness or for my ability to connect or my ability to be empathetic, like all these things that I say came naturally to me. I think I developed them as a way to feel valuable, because being overweight and being picked on, I didn't feel like I had a lot of value in the world. And so if I could connect to people, that made me feel like I had some value in the world. I did that from a very young age. So, friends were always coming to me with their problems and for a shoulder to cry on. And I took a lot of pride in being somebody that could hold space without even knowing what holding space was. I didn't have language for that as a kid, but like being able to be that person meant a lot to me. And it's why I eventually realized that I feel like one of my purposes on the planet is to, try to leave everybody with at least 5% more joy than I found them, right? To activate joy wherever I go in whatever way I can. And so, all through my corporate work, especially when I got into leadership positions, I really cared. I really gave a crap about the people that worked with me and worked for me. And so I went and learned coaching, not coaching in the way that we talk about it, but I learned kind of like coaching in a corporate environment. I went and spent my own money, and my boss didn't want to pay for it because he didn't see the benefit of it. I just said, I think this will be helpful. So I went away and learned this thing, brought it back, started coaching my employees. It was great. Then when I left corporate, I started 2 other companies before I became a coach. So I had a transportation company that I started, and then I had the company with NASA with the space shuttle program. And through that whole time, I had been getting coached and I was having my transformation. And it became a thing where I said, you know what? I've always been this person that people come to. I love being the person that can actually be of service, be helpful. And now there's actually a name for that. That's also a career. And so I said, that's what I want to do, but I didn't do it right away. So I really, like I said, when I left my corporate job, I was already into coaching. I thought it was great. And I knew that it would be great to do something like that in the future, but I didn't do it. I went and had these other two startups. And that was always missing. That element of like direct, transformational, profound service was missing. Both of those businesses had elements of service, but not in the way that I felt really called to give. And so finally, at some point during my second startup, I decided like, I really want to go all in on this. This is really what I want to do. And that was 10 years ago. So I've been coaching and speaking for the last 10 years.
Brilliant. Jason, you having a story and you owning your story are two different things. And when you talk about self-worth, it's more about owning your story and you being able to articulate it in a powerful way, in a positive way. What has been your experience with owning your story and helping others see your story as a mirror of possibility?
Yeah, I mean, it's to me, all of our stories are universal. And, the reason that stories resonate with people and the reason people are moved by stories is because they see themselves in that story, or they maybe see somebody that they really care about and they're close to in that story. So that means the only stories that are powerful are the ones that we see ourselves in, right? And so my story has different colors and textures than other people's stories, but they're all the same story. Right? We've all had some part in our lives. I have never met anybody to this day who has not had a time in their life where they felt lost, or they felt alone, or they felt like they just weren't on purpose, or they felt like they were lit up, or they felt like they were full of joy, or they felt like they were full of love. All of these experiences are human experiences, so we've all had them. So owning your story is essentially owning your humanity. It's saying, I'm no different than anybody else. For better or for worse, I'm no different than anybody else. So the person that, I think is amazing and they built this incredible company and they do all these things, I'm no different than them. And the person that cut me off in traffic and gave me the finger and cursed at me, I'm no different than them either. Yes. And so when we can see that, like, we're kind of all the same. And one of the ways I've heard it said before, which I love, was that God or source energy is electricity. And we are all light bulbs, right? So like the light bulbs behind you, right? So like the light bulbs are all the different people, but that same source of electricity flows through every single one of those light bulbs, right? And so that's what I think owning the story is about, is realizing you're just another light bulb, which is fantastic, which means you have all the possibilities in the world and there's nothing to be ashamed of from anything that you've been through.
Yes. And there is something interesting that is straight from your book, and I would love to listen to your perspective on this. The distinction of chasing your dream life versus creating your dream life.
Yeah.
I would love you to share. You have a story, but then in spite of that, I have seen examples, I have seen people, I've been through that phase when even personal growth becomes like a chase game. And you are looking for this workshop, that workshop, you're looking for, you're just one book away. You're just one thought away. You're just one master away. And you're just constantly on the wait. Like, let me wait for one more year. And then I will. So, yes.
Yeah. It's really funny. And, I don't want to lose my personal growth card by saying this, but there are periods that I think it's very healthy, at least it's been healthy for me, to not do any personal growth work, right? To not find another book, to not find another course, to not have a coach. And I remember a story that Steve Chandler told a long time ago. I don't remember if he just told me or if he told it publicly, but I just remember this story where he was talking to a client, and a client was really, really stressed out and they were dealing with all kinds of stuff. And the client said to him, it's been such a rough day. And I just don't know what to do about this. He's like, I've done 7 Byron Katie worksheets today just to navigate my life. And Steve asked him, he said, how old is your son? And he said, oh, my son's 3. And Steve said, how many Byron Katie worksheets has he done today? He said, well, none. He said, well, maybe he knows something you don't. Because it's not always about doing the work. Sometimes it's about living your life. And I have one of my best friends in the world, Allison, we call her Allie. She said something to me one day, and she's not a coach. She runs a consumer product company, but she said something to me one day that was as powerful as anything I've heard from a coach before. And she said, too much introspection is just as dangerous as not enough introspection, right? Sometimes we can overanalyze, and that's just as bad as not inquiring at all. So I think you're absolutely right. I think sometimes the chase for something better or the chase for something different is either number one, just an obsession with novelty. Number two, it's a way to not take action in your current life, because then you would have to take full personal responsibility for those actions and those results. Or number three, it's just a distraction in life in general. So I have things that I do with my clients. Sometimes I actually just did this with a client a couple of days ago, where I put them on an information ban. And what that means is for 30 days, they get to pick one book, right? One book, that's all. It could be a Kindle, it could be a physical book, whatever. One book. Or if it's like a course, like a video course, fine, one course, but one source of information. And that's all they can take in for 30 days. But there's a caveat. The caveat is anytime, let's say you're reading the book and you have this amazing thing that you read and it's an insight and you're like, wow, that's powerful, and you highlight it and you fold over the page. Anytime you get one of those, you close the book, you put it down, and you go take action on that particular insight. That's it. And that way we get out of the collecting knowledge to add to knowledge, and we instead turn the knowledge into application.
Yes. Jason, intuition has played a key role in my life. And at the same time, it's not just intuition. And I remember that I had moments when I just had the gut feel, when I knew that, this is what I wanted to do, and I did it, and I got amazing results. And at the same time, the moments when I didn't listen to my intuition, it didn't go well. Things didn't go well. At the same time, if I look back these last 25 years, it's not just intuition. It's intuition plus action, spontaneous action, and sometimes spontaneous action and some space where intuition just happens, and you just create space and intuition does its job. And how has intuition played in your role, the role that it has played in your life, and how do you, I don't say how do you balance, but to what extent you create a mix of listening to your inner voice and massive action?
Yeah, this actually, funny enough, it's a great question. It goes back to what we were saying earlier with clarity versus the state of being clear, right? And the challenge, I think, and there's a chapter in Prison Break on this called "Your Intuition is Drunk," and it's the understanding that what we may think is our intuition sometimes is actually our fear, right? So when your intuition says, "Oh, my intuition says I shouldn't ask that person out. My intuition says I shouldn't quit my job. My intuition says I shouldn't start that company," whatever it is. I want to check in with that and check what's my quality of mind, right? What's my state of being when I'm getting those messages? Because as I talk about in the book, imagine you have somebody in your life, a mentor, a friend, a coach, an uncle, an auntie, whatever it is. And anytime you have anything that's going on that you need help with, you go to them and they always give you the best advice. They'll drop everything that's going on for you. They always have your best interest at heart. Like, they are your go-to. They're going to be there to help you. They would never steer you wrong. And so one day you're really stressed out and you go to this mentor or this coach or this auntie or this uncle, and you go to them to get some help, and you walk into their home and they're on the floor and they're drunk. They've had a little bit too much wine, a little bit too much beer, and they're just laying on the floor. Do you think that you would still ask them for advice on what you should be doing in that moment? Of course not.
Of course not.
Right. But that's what we do to ourselves when we're in a low quality of mind, and then we try to ask our intuition for judgment. It's like we're asking a drunk person. The drunk person loves us. When they're sober, they are there for us. But right now they're drunk. And so in that instance, if that was really happening in the real world, you wouldn't try to force your question on them. You would instead say, you know what? this person's always here for me. They're struggling right now. Let me be there for them. Let me have a little compassion. Let me put them up on the couch. Let me get them a glass of water. I can't force them to sober up, but I can sit there and be with them until they naturally sober up. And once they naturally sober up and they're back to their true selves again, then I can ask the question. And so that's what my relationship is with my intuition. I want to be careful to not ask my intuition questions when it's drunk. And if I notice that it's drunk, and I know that it's drunk because it's feeding me things that are fear-based, it can be unkind. Your intuition will be direct, but it will never be unkind, right? So it may say to you, hey, I really want you to give this some thought before you make this decision, because in the past, you've maybe made decisions like this without thinking about them. Is different than saying, you suck. Why would you ever start a business? You're not cut out for that. That's not intuition. Intuition will never be unkind. So just noticing, being really clear and aware how drunk or sober is your intuition at any given moment, and use that as your guidepost as to whether or not you should listen to it.
Yes. Jason, I think it was about 5 or 6 years ago when I created my first workshop on self-leadership, and I called it Authentic Self-Leadership. And it there were hundreds of other workshops, but then I decided that this is my thing. This is what I've been doing. This is what I'll help others do. And my life is different after that. It doesn't mean that, I don't have ups and downs of every day, and it's just part of life. But then that became my core. And I'll come back to the point where you speak about Steve Chandler helping you realize that authentic you, that original you, where you say, I've written here, he said, I see that Steve Chandler, somewhere I forgot it, but you wrote it in your dedication that he helped you see that true you, that real you. And how has life been different after this journey? Like, since you became a conscious creator of your life, and you connected with your true self and who you really wanted to be, and be in it, for the life to be an expression of what your inner self is.
Yeah, man, it's been different in so many ways. The first thing that comes to mind, though, when you ask the question, and I'm going to listen to my intuition because I feel like it's pretty sober right now, is the idea that I have a choice in any given moment to be sucked in to the content of life, or to witness the content of life. And it's the difference between, I was telling a client this a couple of weeks ago, on Netflix, right? On Netflix, they have a fireplace movie that you can turn on, and then it puts a fireplace on the screen. So if you don't have a real fireplace, but you want to have a nice looking thing on the screen, you put it, and it's like a crackling fire. It's beautiful. So I said, it's like if you have that on the screen, and then you get a fire extinguisher and you're pointing it at the TV and trying to get the fire to go out, but it's not a real fire. It's just content on a screen. So if I think I need to put the fire out with this fire extinguisher, man, I'm going to have a really, really stressful way of living, because no matter how long I stand there, the fire is never going to go away. And I think that it's something that I'm doing wrong. But if I can take a step back and say, oh yeah, that's fire on a screen. Now I can interact with the content on the screen in a way that's true, right? That's honest, that's authentic. And so one of the biggest things that's changed for me, and the thing that I have to keep practicing, again, it's not an automatic thing that happens by default all the time, is to notice when I'm getting sucked into the fire on the screen, as opposed to realizing I can sit back and watch it. And it's a beautiful crackling, flame in front of me. There's nothing wrong with it at all. So just really being able to separate myself from the content is huge.
Thank you so much, Jason. It was lovely having this powerful conversation with you. You are a living example of conscious creation. You are a living example of authentic self-leadership. You are a true, authentic influencer. Thank you so much. It was a lovely conversation with you.
Thank you, brother.
I think this 60 minutes of conversation is equal to 60 books of wisdom.
Thank you so much, Ranjan. I love the work you're doing, and thank you for
the work you're doing. Namaste from India.